Hey guys, this is Matthew from Nerd News today, continuing on with my Warhammer 40k painting series. Now last time you guys have seen me do a single figure that came with a beginner's kit essentially, and in the previous Warhammer video I opened up the Intercessors paint set, which came with 3 Ultramarines, one of which is right here assembled now, and I decided that I'm going to try and paint them in a few different ways. So this one here is one I really actually like that came in the set. He has this really cool little meter here, and again, I don't know what the actual meter is called in the game, but I'll look that up later. I'll make sure I do my due diligence and try and post that somewhere over here. So I really like the stance of this character here. I like how he's posed. I like all the little things he comes with. And I decided for this guy, what I'm going to try and do is attempt to do my first edge highlighting. Previously, with my very first one that I painted, I did more or less a dry brush technique, which I picked up from Sonic Sledgehammer Studios on YouTube. And I like that, and I'm going to continue doing that as well with a different model. But again, these are still my very first ones, and I want to experiment with different styles of painting. So this one here, I'm going to attempt to do an edge highlight, which, should be very different from the dry brush technique. And here's a little view of the back side as well. I should add that these guys were, unlike the one I got in the beginner kit, were a little bit different. These were more, I guess, snap-together pieces, maybe? I don't quite know. I haven't seen a ton of these pieces yet. But they definitely assembled a little bit easier than I had with the previous one. Granted, even though I say they went together easier, I still had a lot of problems. In fact, I've already actually ruined one of the models. So out of that box of 3, I now only have really 2 to work with. So that's kind of poop. But regardless, I'm just going to go ahead first now, and since he is already cleaned and he is assembled, I'm going to now prime him, and then we'll move on and start adding some colors and have some fun. So, alright, let's go ahead and get primed and get started. So, step 1, using some Imperial Primer, I'm going to hand brush all the primer onto this Marine and get him started. Now, the main reason I'm priming this by hand is because I don't really have a place that's really suited for doing spray painting of any kind. So I have to do this by hand, but to be honest, I kind of like doing this by hand. So my plan of action is to do one quick pass over it just to get things generally kind of darkened up, and then I'm going to come back around and do a second pass, some more primer, to get all the spots I missed the first time around. So now the primer is all dried, and we're ready to move on to the next phase, which is going to be the base coat, which will be our good old friend for all Smurfs, Macragge Blue. Let's go ahead and get started on that. Alright, so now my base layer is all ready to go here. It's all dried. And the first step in this is going to be, I think what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to look at Chris from Mini Wargaming, which is on YouTube at Mini Wargaming. That's easy enough to remember. There's a lot of great tutorials and tips on their channel for free. And he's got one on shades and washes, and I decided I'm going to try that a little bit. So what I want to do first is darken him up with some Drakenhof Nightshade. And I don't think I'm going to cover the entire model, at least not yet. I'm going to try and just cover basically the parts that'll be darkest, which will probably be like back there on that leg and something, maybe this arm back here. Just work on the darkest darks first with the Drakenhof Nightshade. I'm going to see how that looks. If I don't like it, then I'll just cover it all in Drakenhof Nightshade. But if that does work, that'll be step 1, and then step 2 will be coming back into it with my little mini pot there of Macragge Blue, and that will in turn bring out all of the darks I popped out, so we'll get basically that natural base coat again. So ultimately step 1 here now is going to be just creating the shadows. So here we go. So I decided to use my Citadel starter brush for this one, because I figured, well, I got it in this set of Intercessors, I might as well actually try and use it. And now with my Ultramarine sufficiently shaded, I let it dry for about 40 minutes. So here it is now, the shade is all dry, and the next step is going to be going back with Macragge Blue and doing some highlights. Now, I did decide to, what I was doing earlier was just doing the recesses, only trying to get the darkest dark spots, and then I decided to cover it all in the shade. Didn't really work out. A few spots you can see a little bit better than others, like on the shoulder pads. you can kind of see what I did with the dark, but I don't really know if overall it really worked that well, since ultimately I was just putting shade on top of shade. So I think what I'm going to do in the future is probably just water down the shade and then work my way back up. That's probably a little bit more logical. So lesson learned. But for now, it's time to go ahead and use my Macragge Blue and just start fixing up some of those brighter areas. Alright, so you can see now the Macragge Blue highlights are back in there, and some parts are definitely more noticeable than others, I feel like, but I think that'll get smoothed out, especially once I put the varnish layer on at the end. There you can see. So I kind of chose what I thought would be the spots that would pick up the most light, which would be in this case, let's say, for example, part of that leg there, whereas that one is receding more into the dark, so therefore I kept a lot of the Macragge Blue off that and just left it mostly shaded. Again, same like the top packs over here and the top of the shoulders, whereas the back of the shoulders are still darker. Since, again, this is how I think light's going to hit them. And luckily I do have a little light on top of my camera here, and that kind of helps me figure things out, because if I just cover that up, you can see change in light there. So, yeah, it's looking a little bit more natural so far, but let's see if we can continue to clean this up. So the next step now is I'm going to come in and use some Cronus Blue, and we're going to start doing some edge highlights with that. And in between, I think I'm probably going to start doing my gold shoulder pads again. I might also start putting some Abaddon Black on the gun, as well as some Leadbelcher, to get that going. So let's go ahead and get started. So first I'm going to try that Balthazar Gold on his chest emblem and his pauldrons. Previously I've used Leadbelcher first, and then covered it with the gold paint layers, but this time I'm going to try it a different way, just to see how it turns out. Now ultimately with this Balthazar Gold, while the chest part looked okay, I wasn't really quite into how the shoulders were coming out, and I think something might just be wrong with the paint itself. I tried mixing it and all sorts of things to get it to be a little bit better looking, and it just hasn't really looked the way I want it to look. So I'm considering this maybe a mission fail for now. I'm going to go back to my typical formula. I was also watching a video by the Mini Junkie, and I saw him put silver on the back of the legs and then Nuln Oil, so I'm doing that to basically any parts of the armor that's exposed, where I normally would just put Abaddon Black and then maybe some silver highlights. So I was going along starting to do the edge highlight with a thinner brush. It was hard to film, and ultimately I've discovered that pretty much every blue in the Citadel paint line is really goopy and kind of terrible looking. Case in point, here's the Hoeth Blue I just opened up. It's not very wet, it's very, very goopy compared to the other paints, and that's been making things very hard to paint in terms of being able to put paint on my brush. I tried putting some thinner medium on it, and that didn't do much either, unfortunately. It didn't really help me out a ton. You can see here's my Stormfang. I'm just holding it upside down and nothing's coming out of it. So I decided I'm going to have to switch things up and go back to dry brush a little bit, which is not really working out too great. I switched to Hoeth Blue just because I wanted to try a different blue out and see if that was maybe the problem. And you can kind of see there's some brighter spots. So at this point now, it's kind of just, we're in salvage mode, seeing if we can save this guy before he turns into absolute garbage. So let's hope for the best. I think this might be my first attempt at doing some layering as well in more in-depth ways. Because right now, yeah, this guy's starting to come out a little bit problematic. So stay tuned, see what we can do. So I've now taken some Macragge Blue, and I've used some thinner medium, and we're going to start trying to do some layering to fix up some of these really bright spots. So here it is now, it's about as fixed up as I can get it. I think I've really toned down some of those brighter blues that you saw before, and I was able to come back and do a little bit more edge highlighting, but nothing really super successful in my opinion. I did not expect these blues to be so problematic, and maybe it's just me, maybe it's I've got older paints, I don't know. If any of you guys out there know what's up or can explain what's up with the blues, do let me know. But for now, I think this is about as far as I can take a lot of the edge highlights. So I think the next step now is just finishing off some of the other details, like finishing up the gun and his little PKE meter there, I guess we'll call that. try and get those a little bit nicer, and just start popping some details out, and can't forget those pouches either. So there's still at least plenty to do and some more chances to make this guy look a little bit more presentable. So let's just get closer to the finish line and see how it turns out. So here I am now, pretty close to the end as far as I think I can go with this guy, but I think now I do want to brighten up those, or not brighten up, but bring in the darks a little bit darker to help some of the lighter stuff pop, and maybe that'll help make up for some of the mistakes I made. So I'm going to go ahead and, well, not to null, I meant to actually pull out Drakenhof Nightshade. I don't remember where I put that. Oh, there it is. So I'm going to use Drakenhof Nightshade one more time and just try and hit certain crevices only, and then see if that helps, well, at least help the darks be darker. Let's try that out. And I think that's going to be pretty much it for this Ultramarine at this point. Now you notice I haven't done the eyes yet, and that's because I'm going to try something with them in a little bit. But I think first things first, I want to get the base on him. So I'm going to do the Armageddon dust, and then I'm going to do a few different layers. After the Armageddon dust dries, I'm going to go ahead and do a little wash of Rhinox hide on it, and then that's going to be followed with our midtone of Mournfang Brown. And then, probably wrapping things up, if I can find it, I'm going to be using Xandri dust, there it is, to be our brightest bright. So we're going to make a nice muddy Ultramarine thing for him, I guess. He's been stomping through the mud planet of muddiness. I don't know, there's probably not a place for that in the Warhammer universe, I don't care. I like making mud. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, I personally like it looking pretty muddy, like he's been really stomping around in something that's really gross and icky. You might not, so when you're doing this course, do whatever you like. But yeah, let me know what you think about this kind of muddy look. I don't know if a lot of players make them this dirty looking, but that's kind of how I'm going, at least at this point. And at this point, the bulk of the work is now done. I think the last thing left for me to do is deal with the eyes, deal with these lenses on his helmet there, and that's going to be a big pain in the butt. Here is actually a look at my very first one that I did, and the eyes aren't spectacular on it either, of course, because it was a lot of tiny detail on the first time doing it, but I think I can probably improve on it this round. And I was watching a video on Mini Wargaming's YouTube channel with Chris, one of his tips about how to do the lenses, and I think I'm going to give that a shot here. So the bulk of it is basically I'm going to be doing multiple layers of this very watered down Mephiston red, and I think there might be another red or two in there, and then probably a white at the end. I'm going to go ahead and take some notes, jot it down, because it's a bit of a long video considering it's something that's that tiny that you can barely even see on camera, but a lot of work goes into making them look really good, so I'm going to see what I can do. So let's go ahead, get started, and cross your fingers. And finally, I'm going to just try some white scar to put a little bit of gleam in his eye. And lastly, I'm just going to try and clean it up with basically going back to my base coat of Macragge Blue once again. See if I can make it look a little bit neater, even though it's currently pretty messy and really not going to get any better. Actually, change plans, we're going to use the Alatok Blue instead. Why not? Let's give that a shot. In fact, I'm kind of digging the Alatok Blue so much, we're going to go ahead and just add some more all over the spot where there's some highlights needed. Since for whatever reason, again, my blues are kind of weird, this Alatok Blue flows a lot better, which I like. And there you have it. That is, I guess, all the painting I'm going to be able to do on this guy. So I think the next step now, once it totally dries, since I just did a little bit of cleanup as well, here and there in a few spots, I think the next step is going to be to, just so you guys can see too, since I forgot to mention earlier, I did put in 2 little red blips on his little scanner there. So yeah, I don't want to get a decal. Decal is going to be a whole other episode. So anyway, now that this guy's more or less done, it's time for some matte varnish, and that's going to hopefully tie it all together, and then we can call it a day. And there we go, that is my next Ultramarine all ready, all done, and well, not quite all dry, but pretty close, about 95% of the way there. So this guy came out pretty decent, I'd say, considering this was my attempt at doing something other than the dry brush to try and do some actual edge highlighting. Unfortunately, it didn't quite turn out the way I wanted, and so the edge highlighting is not quite the same, it's not quite really there, so ultimately, a bit of a fail in terms of the technique I was trying to do. But I still think it came out looking pretty decent, and he's definitely tabletop ready. Just for comparison, here's once again, our good friend, the very first one I painted, the very first Ultramarine. And you can see there's some differences, namely, colors are a lot brighter on the first one I did, whereas here they're a lot more natural. I think what I definitely accomplished the most here, that I like the most, is that I was able to do some layering, and I dealt with a lot of mistakes. I had to deal with things that were too bright. I saw a lot of the issues I had earlier with just the blues being problematic. I had to figure out how to solve a lot of problems, and I think I did that pretty well here. So all in all, while it might not have been what I wanted to accomplish in terms of particular techniques, overall they're pretty darn good, I'd say. Pretty good, at least for where I'm at. And again, the base, I really like the base. I'm really digging basing these guys. I think the next thing I'm going to do is probably pick up some of that fake grass stuff and start playing with that as well, make this look really cool. So there you go, folks. Mission accomplished on this Ultramarine. Now let me know what you guys think of this in the comments. Let me know what I could have done differently, what I could have done better, and what I did way, way worse than the average person would have. I'm open to all suggestions and advice, and being that this is still very early on in my process of painting Warhammer 40k stuff, the more information you can give me, the better that I can paint in the future. So this is Matthew from Nerd News Today. Thanks for watching this Warhammer 40k painting video. Stay tuned for more in the very near future.